The story with Lockitron starts about 3.5 years ago. We thought it'd be interesting to connect stuff to the internet that we had around us, which is kind of one of those common themes you hear here. So we started with a smoke alarm back then, and we weren't particularly interested in smoke alarms because we didn't find them to be very high touch, and we thought that consumers would forget about them and they wouldn't use them very often. So we moved then on to access, to door locks. And our first iteration of the product was basically, we bought these devices from Taiwan, soldered them up, and resold them ourselves. And that was the first gen Lockitron, and we learned a lot from that product. But the price point was too high, it didn't have enough connectivity options, and there was a whole host of other things that we wanted to change about it. So we decided that we wanted to make our own hardware product from the ground up with our own ID, our own electronics, our own mechanics, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where we basically, somewhere around beginning of 2012, end of 2011, started designing this product. Now, looking at the funding environment back then, and even still today, venture capital, angel capital was incredibly reluctant about hardware with good reason. A lot of the risks of manufacturing, a lot of the risks of whether or not there's customer demand, execution risks on whether or not the team could do it. And so there's this whole host of risks which you piled onto a traditional software startup, because you had all the other software risks too. So we saw that the funding environment was pretty tough in 2012, and we thought it made the most sense to crowdfund our product. And we knew the guys from Pebble pretty well, and we saw sort of Pebble before it was Pebble, when it was Impulse, how they went about their crowdfunding campaign and what a fantastic success that was. So essentially all through 2012, we were mapping out our crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter. We didn't really even think of going to Indiegogo at that point or any other crowdfunding platform. And so we spent most of the summer of 2012 prepping our video. We filmed it ourselves. We did a whole bunch of stuff. And then we approached Kickstarter. And right about that time, there'd been a lot of flack in the press with Kickstarter with projects not delivering on time. So that included Pebble and a few other ones that were delayed, and people were sort of starting to freak out about this. So Kickstarter sort of responded with this infamous blog post, which is Kickstarter is not a store. The idea being that Kickstarter is not supposed to be this place where you pre-order products that have yet to be made. It's a place for supporting projects, not products. In that blog post, they listed out a whole bunch of things which they said you could no longer do in projects. One of them was you couldn't use that many renders, you could only sell one of an item, you couldn't have sort of distributor packs and things like that, and you essentially had to have a working prototype you could show off. And we said, that's fine, we've got a prototype, we can remove our renders, we can do a lot of stuff and remove the distributor tiers. Because the day after we were submitted, we were rejected from Kickstarter. And so we thought, okay, we got caught up in these new rules, we'll be able to fix it. But let's reach out to someone directly at Kickstarter rather than go through this silly little 500-character reply form. So we managed to get in touch with one of the co-founders of Kickstarter, and he basically said, no, you guys weren't rejected because of this, you guys were rejected because you're home improvement. And we've had this home improvement rule for a long time, and you guys fall under it. And we thought that was pretty bizarre because Kickstarter has had light bulbs, light switches, power outlets, all sorts of home improvement type stuff, and we felt we were being singled out. So there wasn't much we could do at that point. I actually went and tried to visit the Kickstarter offices in New York, and that was unsuccessful, and so kind of like knocking on their door. And we sort of had a few options at that point. We said we can change the product dramatically, which we don't want to do, to make it sort of more hackerish as opposed to finished product for consumers. We can go to Indiegogo. We can find another crowdfunding platform, or we can do it on our own. And the only reason why we thought we might have an ounce of success doing it on our own is because previously that year, Dalton Caldwell with App.net had managed to raise, he was looking for I think $500,000 and he raised $700,000 and some thousand. And we thought, okay, well, Dalton Caldwell is well read, he has a well read blog. If he was shooting for $500,000 and we're shooting for $150,000, sort of the bare minimum for making 1,000 units roughly at cost, then we may as well try that out. We may as well sort of put together our own crowdfunding platform on Lockitron.com throw it up there for $150,000 and for our target in 30 days and see what happens. The last wrinkle in that was sort of payment, and we liked the way the Amazon flow worked with, the Kickstarter flow worked with Amazon. And so we decided that we were going to use actually the same gem that Kickstarter released open source for free to do our crowdfund payments. The whole caveat there was we had to collect essentially Amazon tokens which have payment information associated with them. We couldn't actually collect the actual payment. So that's kind of where we sat, I guess, beginning of October 2012. And I'll just quickly play you, before getting into the rest of the presentation, the video. If it's of your current deadbolt, it lets you lock or unlock your door from your phone. Lockitron unlocks your door for you. You can share access to your door with anyone, anywhere, instantly. You can control Lockitron from anywhere in the world. Last year, we released the world's first commercially available. So basically from here it goes on to another couple minutes describing the product and the background and so forth. I don't have to go through the whole thing. But we were very cognizant when we were making the video to keep the length to 3 minutes or below. Something that we did was we studied all sorts of Kickstarter projects, failed ones and successful ones, and we tried to isolate what were the successful elements of these videos and what helped them to propel them to success. So, long story short, we launched with this video, we launched with our homepage, and within, I think, a few hours we had over $500,000 in orders, vastly surpassing that 150K mark. And within the month, we were about 2.3 million, roughly. So we very quickly proved that the idea of kickstarting something was independent from the platform Kickstarter, and that the consumer behavior has shifted such that people are willing to put money down for something, even though it isn't fully realized yet. So that was, I think, a fascinating thing for us to learn and understand. But really, the fundamentals of running a great crowdfunding campaign didn't change. All of that stays the same regardless of what platform you are on. Because a lot of people have come to us and they said, well, we want to do it the way you did. We got rejected from Kickstarter. And a lot of times we actually recommended, no, you probably should go with something like Indiegogo, because if you aren't really savvy with building your own web apps or something like that, it doesn't make that much sense for you to sort of deal with this thing. So in the course of building this, we took our web app that we had built for Lockitron, and we open sourced it as self-starter, and because we had a lot of people reaching out for it and they wanted to use it for free. But what we found was, again, there's a lot of people who aren't very tech savvy, and they're trying to set up a Ruby on Rails app, and they have no idea about databases or managing servers or anything like that, and it just didn't make sense. And we said, if you don't get rejected from Kickstarter, that's A, probably still first the best route to go. B, Indiegogo handles a lot of the payment stuff and everything for you, so you don't have to worry about that. And C, only in the edge case where you sort of have a technically inclined crew and you're really, want to build this platform, should you go ahead and use it. The advantages, however, of having on our own homepage were pretty good, in the sense that when the campaign ended, we didn't just cut off sales, we just upped the price of the device. So the sales kept on coming in. So we had all this long tail traffic of all this press linking to Lockitron.com, not some Kickstarter URL, which we had no control over. So that was really powerful. Additionally, we could do some really interesting hacks. And hacks are sort of one of the three things that I think I would emphasize out of this. The first one being authenticity. With regards to the video, we made it ourselves. It had a lot of authenticity about the product. But at the same time, we didn't try to sort of jump into paying a lot of money for a professional video or having that done. And a lot of projects have done very successfully with that, but we didn't have the resources to do it. The next one I would say is empathizing with the customers, in the sense that a lot of us are hackers ourselves, and we get really, really excited about the technical aspects of our products, and ever so frequently that you get wrapped up in that, you get wrapped up in trying to sell those things, when in reality all the consumer wants to know is what are the benefits? How is this thing going to make my life better? And then the last one is hacks. And so coming back to hacks and why things on the website were more useful, we were able to sort of last moment, the night before, we were talking about it, and we said, what would be really interesting at the end of the checkout flow? So the person has already reserved a Lockitron, and how do we get them to tell all their friends about it, and how do we compel them to do that? And so there's more traditional routes like referral codes where you can hand out discounts and things like that, which work pretty well. But we thought, well, why don't we do something called a backer number? Why don't we index where the person is in line and let them know how far down they are in line? And it gives them a little sense of ownership about the project, because the lower the backer number, the earlier you were to reserve. And so in essence, you become somewhat of a thought leader or something in backing this product at a low number. And the backer numbers were wildly successful beyond anything we expected. The amount of social traffic that we generated from it was phenomenal. And early on, it felt like every sixth or seventh person was tweeting out their backer number, which is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, you're talking, out of thousands of people, it just becomes this social storm of people talking about your product and putting out their backer number, and now they have this unique thing to hold on to. So that was one of those sort of last minute decisions, built very quickly, but worked out very well. I think in a launch you do 1,000 things, and 2 or 3 of them will stick really, really well, and you learn the next time. In terms of why we did focus so much on video, part of it was we learned from a video that we had back in 2011 for our first launch, for our first original product. And that video was 90 seconds, it had no voiceover, and it had simple text. And it got a huge amount of coverage around the world. I think we got 140,000 views in the US and an additional 70,000 views in China. And the reason it got so many views in China is because you could so easily see what the product did. There was no sort of other voice in a different language distracting you from what it did. It was very simple. But it didn't do us very much good because we couldn't sell those locks in China. So we took sort of everything that we learned from that, and we said, okay, let's put it into this video, mix it up what we learned from these Kickstarter videos that were really successful, like Pebble and Ouya and all those guys, and let's go from there. And so that was another thing that really helped us with our raise, was that our video actually sort of caught fire. We had, I think Reddit picked it up, and then 9gag picked it up, and by the end of a few weeks, we had over 2 million views, and then it eventually hit about 3 million views. So the video became a massive, massive selling tool for the product. And I think going forward, video is going to be one of our sort of cornerstone parts of our marketing efforts, because it's so easy for a person to sit down, watch a clip for 90 seconds, for 3 minutes, and understand what your product does, as opposed to reading a one-page article about it. We actually reached out to a number of outlets ahead of time, and we said we have this kind of interesting story of getting rejected from Kickstarter and blah, blah, blah. Nobody cared about that story. And in fact, most of them ignored us. And finally, we had a connection at TechCrunch, because they'd written about us before, and they said, okay, this is an interesting product, we'll write about the V2. But they were the single outlet who was willing to write about us. And even in that, sort of the Kickstarter thing was mentioned as a small blurb at that point. So we launched with TechCrunch. We were originally trying to launch with Engadget or The Verge, but between TechCrunch and the video, we did really well. We reached out to our own network of friends and stuff, but I wouldn't say that numbered more than 500 to maybe 1,000 across all of our Facebooks and Twitter accounts. So we got very lucky with a really small amount of PR. That's not to say that you shouldn't do it, and there's a lot of fantastic PR firms and folks out there who can help you get sort of 2 or 3 big press blogs lined up, and that's probably a more, if you have the resources to do it, that's probably a safer bet. So.
Did it kind of blossom? Sorry. Did it kind of blossom from there as far as
exactly.
Additional outlets then picked it up because of the TechCrunch article and the buzz?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's typically what happens in a launch. Is you can launch with one really good press outlet, and all the other ones will disperse through. And that's why we thought that might happen with TechCrunch on the second time, because it happened the first time as well. And so, one of my beliefs is that if you survive V1 of your product and get to V2 of your product, you've laid a fantastic foundation of sort of press and your name and news out there for your V2 product, and so I think that helped us too. So what we had in 2011 was not nearly as massive as what happened in 2012, but it helped us a lot.
Can you talk a little bit about how you guys define technically the crowdfunding and pre-sale and post-pre-sale, and how legally and technically those things are different? That whole sort of thing is really important for us to learn about.
Yeah. So I think the lines there are all still incredibly blurry as to what a pre-sale is versus a pre-order versus crowdfunding. We originally defined ourselves as crowdfunding, and really, when we did that, there were really no legal implications to it. I don't think the whatever Crowdfund Act or whatever that's called was passed, so there were no legal bases for it. But we saw it as, okay, we want to get as close to Kickstarter as possible. So we want to collect funding. Oh, but they won't let us collect funding, the payment processor, but we want to get as close to that as possible, so we're taking credit card information from day one with the explicit intent that, hey, we can charge your card at any time within the next year. And that was outlined sort of in the Amazon token that we take. As opposed to, say, a pre-order, which is maybe more along the lines of, I take your credit card information, but I'm not charging now, or maybe I don't take your credit card information, I just take your email address. I think a lot of people who do pre-orders don't take credit card information at all, they just take email addresses. And that's a very safe way to do it, but then, there's a lot of risk with your conversion there, because you might have a huge email list and not be able to convert into credit cards. So I know a lot of folks have been leveraging Stripe, because Stripe is much more flexible now that you can sort of take credit card information and not charge it, and it's a lot easier to deal with the payment information than Amazon. The reason why we went with Amazon, and we know the guys from Stripe and really like them, and we know the guys from WePay and really like them, is because Amazon already had a massive database of consumers' shipping address information. And so the process for checking out on Amazon is a very, very seamless flow, in the sense that it's sort of like, go to Amazon, enter in your Amazon password, because usually they cache your email address, hit submit, address, done. And it's a very, very quick, seamless process. However, on the payment side, Amazon is really just getting up to speed with a lot of this non-Kickstarter crowdfunding, and we've heard of projects that get totally shut down, and other projects like us, we managed to get a contact at Amazon, which helped us out a lot immensely, because we were able to tell our story to a person. So coming back to your original question, I don't actually know what the barriers are there, but I would say define them very clearly with people from the get-go, with your backers, and very clearly what you plan to do. The payment processors are willing to work with you on this stuff. If you look at Tile, they put in a big disclaimer underneath that's basically like, we're going to make our best efforts to deliver this product, because they process payment right to begin with. And they managed to be able to move forward with that. I think there's another company like Tile who also has the same disclaimer. There's another company that's done it as well. So,
two follow-up questions to that.
Yeah.
So did you process payments immediately, and did you have a progress bar visible to the customer on your site to show the progress of funding?
So yes, we had a progress bar on our site, but we didn't process payments immediately.
Why not?
Because at that point we hadn't had our contact with Amazon who would let us do it. And so we, in retrospect, I would say, being able to take funding up front helps immensely, but at the same time, you want to be very, very careful to separate the funding for development from the funding for working capital. And being, given that we weren't able to start taking payment until much later on, it was much more helpful, because it was very clear that, hey, all of that payment goes straight into working capital. It doesn't go into product development, essentially. So I'd say it's a double-edged sword if you're able to take payment up front. It makes things a lot easier, but it's riskier.
So the entire initial amount of money that you took, the 2 million something, was that for working capital or product development?
That was for working capital. So we, at that point...
You already did crowdfunding.
Exactly. We didn't do crowdfunding until, we didn't start taking payments until we started shipping the first units. And even then, sort of were out of sync, taking more payments than for the units we shipped immediately. But we said, okay, we're shipping now, so we can start putting this capital into working capital. We had some angel funding, and we raised a little bit more, but that's what kept us going. Yeah.
So where were you in development when you launched your product?
So we had a working prototype when we launched, a working mechanical prototype, a working, or I should say an ID prototype, and working basic electronics. All three of them didn't necessarily mechanically fit together. So a lot of what we showed were demos of the product, but at that point the product hadn't been condensed down into its final ID form factor. So whenever you do, I mean, I don't know how many of your companies deal with sort of really mechanical stuff, but whenever you do highly mechanical stuff, your original prototypes are going to take up a lot more space than the final product. And so that's why we just didn't have the resources at that point to refine it down to what we ended up as. So
How long did it take for you to go from like, that prototype to what you're shipping?
it takes a good. So we had a working demo in January a year ago at the previous CES, but the electronics didn't fit into it, so everything mechanically was there, so we just had to get our final electronic form factor, and that happened a few months after that. So my guess is about 6 months, but always keep in mind you're going to iterate with all of this stuff, and each iteration cycle, it's always like a big question of whether you sort of take the final shot at that point and go through the cost and expense of condensing it down into the final product, or you keep iterating on your breadboard, or you keep iterating on your sort of, industrial design, things like that. Because the moment you condense them all together, that's when you incur the most costs, because you have to go through fab and PCBA on all these expensive small PCBs, and we didn't want to do that early on.
What do you think about CrowdTilt?
So CrowdTilt is awesome. What CrowdTilt has done actually is they've taken the original self-starter and they've turned it into CrowdHoster. And I would say if you want to host something on your own site and you don't want to deal with the hassle of the back end, they've built a ton of tools to make it a lot easier. And I highly encourage that if you're looking at not doing it on Kickstarter or Indiegogo.
And what's your thought on the value of doing it yourself, kind of in today's environment, in terms of more control, or in terms of how your campaign's perceived, or sort of other factors?
Yeah, I mean, I'm impressed by the number of companies that sort of, there have always been pre-orders around for the last 15 years, 20 years, but since the internet has been around. But since us, I've noticed a lot more high-profile campaigns that have done it entirely on their own and demonstrated that they can do it entirely on their own. So I would say if you have the PR effort lined up, if you have a polished website, if you have a polished experience, then definitely doing it on your own. If you still want some of the potential buzz of the community of Kickstarter, then you should go for that. Now, to quantify, we tried after the fact to quantify how much does Kickstarter or Indiegogo actually add in additional traffic to your project. And it's really hard to tell, but at the high end, we think it was roughly 50%, and at the low end, about 10%. And so we're not talking orders of magnitude here, we're talking at max, roughly double, and at least a small fraction. And so the roughly double number comes from SmartThings, and the 10% number comes from, there's this power charging station where I asked the creator of it how much he got from it. And then I know Pebble fell somewhere in between there. So the amount of actual traffic that you get back in from Kickstarter isn't that high. You really do have to do your own PR efforts. Yeah.
And then it's sort of a wash given the fact that if you go with Kickstarter or Indiegogo, you may get that incremental thing, but then again, all the links point to the Kickstarter campaign, which you might otherwise, like you did it, right? You kept having all those follow through things.
Yeah, but that said, I don't know enough about Indiegogo as to whether or not they've been really successful, because one of the things they're really pitching hard now is that they have this massive email list, and they will send out new projects dynamically based on the tastes of users to backers. And apparently that's working pretty well, whereas Kickstarter is more like, if Kickstarter likes it and the Kickstarter staff like it, then you do really well. So Indiegogo might in fact help out more. I would talk to them about it and ask for actual hard numbers as to what their success rates are. But again, doing it on your own, you want to make sure that your website and what you put together has more polish than any Indiegogo or Kickstarter campaign you could put together, because you want to create this sense of value and this really nice feel to it. And so, the good examples were after us. There was Tile did really well, Coin did really well on their own. They've done phenomenally well. So a lot of those sites, they just, if you go to them and it's very, very simple. Thalmic Labs with the Neo armband did really well. So I'd look at those examples and try and look for ones that have failed as well and see why.
So you just mentioned Coin, and you have your own progress bar on your site, right? So what do you think of the difference between like having that progress bar and not? Like Coin did really well without it, you guys did really well with it. What are your feelings for the future for that?
Yeah, I think that a couple of the other ones dropped it as well, like the Mio armband. Tile is a really interesting one to look at for the progress bar, because they're one of the later ones to have used a progress bar. And early on, it wasn't helping them. Early on, for the first 2 weeks of their campaign, they're kind of stagnating, and they weren't trying to raise that much, and yet at the same time, they're only a small fraction of that. And so it kind of looked like it was hurting more up front. So I think that definitely can be a hindrance if you set your goal too high, or if for some reason you don't get really good acceleration right out the gate. That said, when you're doing really, really well, everyone's super excited to see the $10 million progress bar on Pebble or something like that. I think removing the progress bar is essentially just taking it to a different level of professionalism in terms of we aren't crowdfunding this. Maybe that is a good distinction in terms of we're now taking pre-orders, we're not crowdfunding. But it also does lose some of the adrenaline, excitement of let's watch this story, let's watch it explode. But that said, I haven't really seen the press following crowdfunding campaign stories in 2013 the same way they did in 2012. It seems like they backed off from a lot of those this is exploding from day-to-day type stories. And so maybe this is just the next evolution of it, that opportunity is closed. So it's hard to say. Did you have a question? Yeah.
I was curious about how many extra sales you got after your campaign.
I can't say specific numbers, but essentially in the same magnitude as we got during the campaign. So a lot, a huge amount. And we haven't done any active marketing, and we've just sort of been doing it based on word of mouth and people showing their friends and the video. So
just on that, even just a generalize, what assumptions would you make on if the campaign does X in the first 30 days, what's the potential over 12 months? If as a multiple, would you say 2X or more?
Yeah, let me think to what other companies did and what I know from their numbers. I think that smaller projects, so if you did less out the gate, you have a bigger potential for a higher multiplier if you're in a really interesting product. Whereas if you've already got $2 million in sales, you've saturated a reasonable amount of the early adopter TechCrunch readers and that type of thing. So whereas if your project only hit $500,000, but it's really, really interesting and maybe people didn't miss it the first round, you're more able to multiply that. So it's a sliding rule. So like the Pebbles of the world, they might come close to 2xing it. We can push a little bit further than that, and then projects that only hit, say, $500,000 or $250,000, if it's still a good product and it just didn't hit that marketing stride, I think they can easily 4x it, probably more. And that's from 3 or 4 data points that I know about, but I can't talk about publicly. So yeah.
You said that you ran your sort of crowdfunding campaign at a certain price point, and then post-funding you raised the price point. Was there did you release sort of messaging about get in while it's X price, and then afterwards, it's only limited number of these, or go to X price, or what was sort of the strategy there?
Yeah, we did a little bit of messaging, but we should have done more, is our lesson there. So we did have a little bit, I think, a couple of blog posts and a few Facebook posts of like getting your order now. We also, the way it worked with our sign-up flow was we collected your email before you got taken to Amazon. And so if the person didn't actually complete the Amazon checkout flow, we still had their email. So we emailed all of those people a few days before and we said, hey, get in there really, as soon as possible. But I think we could have done much more of, creating this sort of anticipation of like, you better get in now type thing than we did. Part of it was we were actually unsure what we wanted to set our price at the end until, a week before we were saying, should we do $199? Should we do $179? Should we keep it close to $149 and something like that? And it's always best if you can plan these things out, even if you don't follow your plan to a T. So I would definitely say yes, if you can have a plan at the end of the campaign, say the last week of the campaign, to really leverage that and be posting it everywhere and emphasizing it everywhere, you can probably do better than we did then. So.
Then, real quick, could you map out sort of the transaction flow step by step for us, and then sort of how that interplayed with the back end software, and sort of how you manage that? So sort of customer facing and on the back end,
Yeah.
what were the drivers there, things that were working?
Yeah, so from Lockitron.com, we essentially had a big pre-order button, and the pre-order button took you to another page which basically said, okay, let's get your email address, and then we're going to send you off to Amazon to process payment. We didn't ask anything about shipping address or color at that point. And then you entered your email address and you clicked on Pay with Amazon, and then you're taken to the Amazon sign-in page. And at this point, I believe you're within the realm of Amazon Flex Payments. I forget exactly what it is. They have sort of a marketplace solution that we played into. So you sign in from Amazon, then you're taken to a page. Now this is where the flow differs on mobile versus web, and Amazon handles this. On desktop, you select your shipping address or your billing address, and then you hit continue, and then you select your shipping address, and then you hit continue again. So you have two address selection steps. And then I think you get to preview the purchase, and it says, this Amazon token has the right to charge X dollars within the next X months in total, and then you hit confirm. Whereas on mobile, all three of those steps, sort of selecting the shipping, the billing, and the confirmation, I believe they put all three of them on one or two pages. So on mobile, it's even faster. Amazon really knows how to optimize their flows on mobile, and it's just fantastically fast on mobile. So after you've hit the confirmation page, you're redirected back to Lockitron, and Amazon. Let me go back for a second on the back end side. So when we took the email address, we attached an order number to that email address, and we sent that order number off to Amazon. And so when the person checks out, Amazon says, hey, Lockitron, we've got this payment token, which gives you the right to charge a card for X amount of time, and we've got your order number, so now that you can bind the two together in your system, and you know how they're linked. So then on that checkout page, we would say, thank you for backing, this is your order number. And in fact, we put the order number, the URL, so that they could bookmark it. It's not really, we didn't feel like we were leaking information with that order number because they've already paid for it, and it's really just a reference at that point. So we said, okay, thank you for backing us. And then we had the share links, which had, within the share links in the JavaScript, we put in the dynamic counters to say your backer number XYZ, and we would say it on the page, like your backer, number 1,203. And then we would drop that into the Facebook share and the Twitter share. So, and so I guess more on the back end, the original version of it, which we had to do a lot of work on to bring it up to speed, was we created the users in our system, we associated orders with them, and we stored the Amazon token on the order. And then now, since then we have code which allows us to execute that transaction, and our Amazon Payments account collects the funds from that.
The share links and the backer number, was that on a page or was that an email that you followed up with?
That was on a page. So it was directly after they completed their purchase. If sort of in the psychology of selling and buying, if you read about it, people are the most excited after they just complete your purchase. I mean, that's why Best Buy can sell so many warranties, is because people are like, I don't want to, this thing is precious and I'm so excited about it. And so that's why we wanted to hit them right after they completed the Amazon checkout flow. So, yeah.
So, what would you recommend a fundraising strategy to be at this point? Should companies try to raise money before their crowdfunding campaign, like a large seed round, to be able to properly execute the campaign, and then after the campaign is over, leverage that to kind of raise money at a higher valuation, or try to do like an equity financing at that point?
So I would definitely encourage raising seed ahead of time if you can. I would say always take money if you can. The reason being is because now, after a lot of these crowdfunding campaigns, the VCs very quickly caught on, and they basically assumed a sit and wait strategy, and they said, okay, when we see that you've executed on this product, that's when we'll come in with the A round. So I would say if you can lock up the seed funding beforehand, that's a great idea. Typically, you can still pull in seed funding after the success, but the A round is still proven really tricky. And so if you see like Pebble pulled in their A round essentially after they started shipping, Ouya pulled in their A round right about the time that they're shipping. So there's a lot of examples of people who did that. Mio, Thalmic Labs, pulled in their A round right away after their crowdfunding campaign, or their pre-order campaign was really successful. But they're sort of an outlier in that regard. I think most people still have to prove that they can execute on shipping and delivering the hardware product, unless your team has a proven track record of making hardware and shipping hardware. So.
And last question, did
Yeah.
you code all of the back-end stuff yourself? Did you guys take that on, or did you port in tools?
Yep, we built the backend ourselves. So we had an original Rails backend where we did a lot of our Lockitron stuff, and then we just built on top of that. And yeah, I think three people on our team can write in Rails, so we have a pretty strong capability on the software side there. I would say if you only have one back-end software person, I wouldn't encumber them with this platform, definitely, because you have to be dealing with so much other stuff during your crowdfunding campaign, and maintaining your crowdfunding side is not fun. And we had to deal with that, and we lagged behind. We only actually got out like 3 or 4 blog updates during the whole thing because we were dealing with, oh shit, this thing just broke and we have to fix this in software and stuff like that. So, yeah.
What's your thought on doing display advertising and retargeting during the campaign?
It's worked really, really well for a lot of projects. What you want to do is you want to throw a certain budget at it, substantial enough that you can quantify what exactly your cost per acquisition is. And we haven't done it, but we've heard from some companies that they've done really, really well with it. So if you see there's this, I think it works best when you already have a little bit of a sort of a PR and social storm brewing, so that you can just tack onto that. Whereas if it's kind of crickets and nothing's really going on, you might just throw a lot of money into it. So very carefully quantify what your cost per acquisition is.
I've kind of heard that some companies have put like 15 grand a day into that. Once the ROI was there and they knew what the acquisition costs were, does that sound about like what you heard?
Sounds about right. Yep. So, again there, you want to very clearly, with whatever crowdfunding platform you have, you want to very clearly be able to pull that capital in immediately from your backers so that you can feed it back into the system. Otherwise, you're burning through your own capital, and that's going to go pretty quickly. So, cool. Yeah.
How far along were you in terms of getting manufacturing quotes when you launched? How sort of locked down was your bomb?
It's a very interesting question, because our electronics bomb was very well locked down. So we knew on that side pretty well, and then we had pretty good quotes from doing stuff in China, and the things that we didn't have quotes for were sort of the accessories around the edges. So We didn't have a direct quote for batteries at that point, which we put in the box. We didn't have a direct quote for packaging, but we had rough estimates. So we had a pretty good breakdown of what the costs were. We had also done local quotes for our injection molding and our tooling and that stuff. So we had a sense of if we want to do stuff locally, what it would cost, but we didn't know the full detail there. And so after the project, we were still looking at doing all of our manufacturing locally for quite a while, for a good month or two. But we just couldn't get the quotes anywhere near what we needed them to be. And I think that's because it depends on the complexity of your product in terms of the number of materials and the types of processes needed. And if you have, greater than 3 materials or types of processes needed, it's very, very hard to do it domestically, was what we landed on the conclusion of. So yes, we did have quotes in place before we went in. We did have an idea of, what numbers we needed to hit and what numbers we wanted to hit. Of course, we were shooting for 1,000 quantity, and at that we weren't really making any money at all, which is a pretty scary fact, and I wouldn't do that at all. I would say even at your 1,000 quantity, you need to have a margin of error built in, and ours was very slim. But then when you move up to the 10K plus quantity, things get a lot cheaper. I think the curve is very, very steep there between 1K and 10K. Yeah, and so that's actually an interesting thing kind of talking about in terms of domestic versus overseas manufacturing. I'm sure you guys have a lot more experience and heard a lot more stories here versus when we were doing this on our own between domestic and overseas manufacturing. But I would again say that the decision for us boiled down to we simply have too many components to make it here stateside, and they come from too many different materials. So for instance, we have I don't know, a dozen to 17 injection molded parts. We have a die cast part out of aluminum. We have a stamped stainless steel part. We have stuff which is cut from rod stock. We have, even in the injection molded side, it's a mix of ABS and POM, so the tooling has to be sometimes tweaked for that. There's some rubber components that are on there. There's some felt bits that we put so that Lockitron, when it snaps on your door, doesn't leave scratches. So all of this number of components, after about 2, the domestic suppliers were sort of getting overwhelmed, and they're like, well, we're just going to have to buy that from China anyway. We're just going to have to source that bit from China anyway. And then along with that, the assembly of the gear train and all of the manual labor just added up to be way too expensive to do domestically, because we really wanted to do it domestically just to keep it in our backyard and be able to watch it and monitor it. So what we came to was a sort of a balance of, okay, we're going to make the plastics and metals and the complex parts in China, and then we're going to do final assembly with our circuit boards here in California, which is what we're doing now. And I would say it's a fantastic idea, but the logistics are really a bitch, and dealing with sort of, getting things in time where they need to be, and if one factory lags behind the other one, because you're essentially dealing with 2 at this point, then you're in a really tough spot. And so we've had to deal with that, and you want to minimize the costs, you want to sea freight things, you don't want to air freight or FedEx anything, things like that. So we learned the hard way through a lot of the logistics stuff. But I would say it is possible to do sort of final assembly here if you take a really long, hard look at it and you price things out appropriately.
So if you're doing it all over again, because the world's changed,
Yep.
from a crowdfunding perspective next to you, but how would you go about it now differently?
In terms of fundraising or manufacturing?
Well, in terms of launching a pre-order campaign.
I think that if we were to do it again today, I think there have been so many phenomenal examples set of doing a pre-ordering campaign, which is not a crowdfunding one, on your own website, that is a really decent way to go about it. There's still a temptation in my mind of sort of getting the excitement of a crowdfunding campaign behind you. But that said, there have been so many great examples of these pre-order campaigns set that I would probably go that route. Additionally, I would use as many of these sort of hacks as possible in terms of like the backer number. I would definitely use that again. I would produce more video content ahead of time, so I would have more than one video lined up. I would I would definitely look from day one at advertising and seeing, you know, what we could do there and how to quantify that. So there's probably, you know, 3 or 4 additional things that I would do there. And I would try to focus less on us building our own software, because again, it was a great story and it was wonderful that we released Self-Starter, but that sucked up a lot of our efforts. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the analytics tools you used to track incoming traffic and how you leverage that to grow sales?
Basically Google Analytics. We didn't have Mixpanel set up at that point. We had some internal tracking tools so we could tell the stats and the numbers of things from day to day. But at a certain point, actually the day we launched, there was some problem in our server and we couldn't actually see what was going on for a couple of hours, and we were trying to frantically fix stuff. And the only way that we could keep track of numbers was through the Twitter backer numbers, which is kind of hilarious. But we lost all track for those 2 hours because the server was just being hammered and
Wow. So did you guys host on Amazon?
no, we host on Rackspace.
Did were you set up to auto scale?
No.
If you had certain traffic?
No, we didn't have that sophisticated of a backend at that point. We've since built that out, but at that point we had, you know, a single box. We upped the RAM, and what actually brought us down was not anything related to traditional traffic. It was we had some long-running query in the backend looking for. It was actually for our V1 Lockitrons. That was another really dumb move. We launched our new homepage along with our new internal web dashboard for customers that already existed. And it was all pretty and nice and new for those customers, but it was doing this query, I think it was a geo query in the back end, and the API that it hit reached a limit of like 10,000 queries very, very quickly. And then that started, all these open connections from our server were hanging, and so we couldn't figure out what our server was doing. And that's actually what brought us down. Nothing at all related to being a single box or, you know, not being able to scale or anything like that.
And then you had the analytics, the Google Analytics sort of coded into the framework of the site, or where does that live?
It's just on the front end. So Google Analytics is just a JavaScript drop-in, very simple.
And then did you use any sort of tool to visualize or make a better use of the analytics data, or do you just go into the Google Analytics site?
Just Google Analytics, yeah. And even now, it's far better than it was, 18 months ago. It's really powerful. You get a lot of data for free there. I would say if you're looking for doing sort of your own data and you want to track your own metrics, Mixpanel is kind of the standard go-to software there. We didn't like Mixpanel for a couple reasons, mainly that it got really expensive really quickly, and it didn't scale well with us. But Google Analytics got us phenomenal data. So.
How was that data actionable for you guys?
So we were able to see on Google Analytics, so we had this whole debate about like, should we continue with Amazon or should we use Stripe? And we were able to break down how many users are on mobile and how many users are on desktop web, which was really important. We were able to see where in the world our orders were coming in from. And so the product is really made for the US and Canada. Luckily, that's where most of our orders were coming in from. We were able to see where the sources of traffic were, which is really the most important part. So you're able to see what press outlets, what articles are really bringing in the most traffic to you, and going back and trying to retarget for those audiences. A slew of things, I would say. It's really impressive, the data you get from Google. Yeah.
So how did you prioritize your mobile applications since you were building hardware? Did you build the hardware first and then come in with the mobile app?
So we were really lucky because we had our V1 mobile app already at that point because we had our previous gen product out there. So we had experience with mobile, but we knew that, I guess, when we first started doing Lockitron back in 2010, it was an internet-connected door lock, not a smartphone-connected door lock per se. So back then, we didn't know how powerful Lockitron or the smartphone would be for Lockitron. But it quickly became apparent through 2011 that the smartphone was really where it was at. And so we knew that mobile app development was really, really important for us. That said, I'm trying to think. We re-released our mobile app well before we started shipping the physical product. So that was really important to get out the door. And both on Android and iOS, you really, I know some companies have really only done iOS, but you have to, I think at this point, cover both platforms pretty evenly. So, yeah.
How many people did you have in your team when you launched? And how did that grow?
3.5, 4. And no, it was 3 full-time, and then 1 person part-time. And now we're still very small. I mean, we're maybe 10, I think, and then a couple of contractors in there. So still relatively small. Yeah. Yeah.
So what I noticed on your site was that you did run a blog.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about why you ran the blog, who managed it, and sort of who managed or how you managed social media during the campaign?
Mm-hmm. So the idea behind the blog was, okay, if we're not going to have an update section like Kickstarter gives us, then we need to post updates somewhere for backers. So let's do it on a blog. So we set up a blog with our own custom, very simple looking template that we made. And we sort of said, all right, we're going to put all the product updates here. So we're going to both send them out via MailChimp. We're going to send out a MailChimp campaign for every update. And we'll post it on the blog, and then we'll post the blog on Facebook, so that people can access this anywhere. We want to make the updates as accessible as a Kickstarter project updates would be. So I think even now at the top of the homepage, that's why it's like we have updates, and there's a number there showing how many blog updates we've done.
What was sort of what's the reason for the update? And would you notice there's just higher engagement, more people are happier? What happens because of updates?
Yeah. Updates definitely helps with the engagement, and it also helps keep the consumer excited as to why they backed your product in the first place. So the biggest thing that might happen in this is your loss of mind share, that over 6 months or 9 months or a year while you bring your product up online, people forget about it. And other cooler stuff has taken their attention since then. Whereas if you have this reminder of, hey, we're here, this is what we're doing, and you can tell a really, really good story about what manufacturing is like, that's really helpful. And we've gotten phenomenal feedback from our customers and our backers that's like, hey, I love seeing this stuff because I had no idea that this is how you actually manufacture and make stuff. I love seeing these photos and videos.
I also noticed you were able to sort of manage like a deadline based on
Yeah.
product hardware updates and sort of giving context to the reason it was maybe delayed by a week or whatever.
Exactly, yes. So delays have been, really, really difficult for us, and partly because we didn't have a lot of resources to throw into manufacturing. And the blog is the best place where we can be quite frank about, like, hey, this is why we're delayed. This thing is not here yet. We thought it would be. This thing is not here yet. And that transparency is really the only way that you can be fair to a customer with delays. Otherwise, it's just a black box, and you may or may not have taken their money, and I think that's in the long run very negative. So.
Did you do email engagement in addition to the blog updates?
Yeah. So the email updates are exactly the same as the blog updates. So the email update gets sent out via MailChimp. And we committed to, when we saw that there were going to be delays, we committed to updates on a 2-week regular basis. And I highly encourage that, is engage with your customers on a regular basis. Because we found the first updates were like a month, 4 to 5 weeks apart, and it was just too long, and we were leaving customers hanging for too long. So I'd say commit to a regular update schedule.
So after you guys launched, a slew of competitors kind of came on your heels. So how did you deal with the intellectual property there? Because obviously you guys had some kind of patent. These other guys are doing the same exact thing.
Yeah.
Plus or minus a few features.
So I can't say much there because, so stepping back for a moment, in the patent process, typically what happens for small hardware startups is you're like, I can't afford to file a full patent, so I do provisional. And then I kick the can down the road for a year. And then at that 1-year deadline, you file the actual patent. Now, depending on how much hardware versus software you have, the actual patent times before you get your first office action are anywhere from 15 to 24 months, which is a very, very long time. So even though we filed our patent pending back in 2012 and our provisional dates to 2011, we're still waiting on the actual IP, and there's several patents we're waiting on there. So we don't actually have that there. In terms of how, with regards to the competitive landscape and how you deal with competitors, leaving aside someone, directly cloning you, I would say look on it as there really is demand in the space. People really do want my product, and everyone says it, but the rising tide helps all ships. So it's true in that those companies who are just getting this idea out there are going to help sell your product, and you just need to sort of dial back in every time you see a different competitor on what are my core value aspects, what do I understand about the space. And we've been in the space for a while, and we feel like we have a pretty good grasp on what exactly consumers want, and we have a base of our original customers who told us what they want in the new version. So I think that yes, file IP, but whether or not that's actually going to be useful in the long run is debatable, because it's very, very expensive even once you have the IP to go sue someone or something like that. And conversely, in hardware, I would say if you're playing in a space where there's a few Fortune 500s or big companies doing sort of a traditional version of what you're doing, so there's a lot of door lock companies out there, it's great to have that IP, because some of them are going to send you nasty letters saying, hey, we demand a royalty, blah, blah, blah. And you want to be able to deal with that in a very sort of straightforward, hey, we don't think we're infringing on your IP, and this is why. And this is what's unique and innovative about what we've done. And so be prepared for that. It's just part of hardware.
Would you say that then your IP strategy is more on the lines of using IP as a shield rather than as a sword?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, we, even if we had the resources to go out and sue people, I don't know if that would make the most sense. Again, leaving aside a person directly copying some aspect of our technology that we see to be, really core to us. This is something that the really, really big guys can afford to do, like Apple and Google, but small companies can't. So, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can pursue it. You don't have a patent issue, do you? Yeah.
No. And so we're
Patent issue, you got nothing.
Exactly.
To even stop them.
Surprisingly, though, people will send you letters based on their patents pending. So people will demand royalties because they say, hey, this is almost issued, so you'd better, And they'll say it in a very indirect way. They will never say outright that you are infringing on their property, because then you can go and get default judgment, which is basically like you go to a judge and you say, hey, in this letter they say that I'm infringing on their stuff. Can you just go ahead and judge on this right away? And it's very risky for them to say that. So they'll always say in sort of flowery language, this is our patent, this is our IP. You should take a look at it. We're very protective of our IP, and that's all they'll say. They're not going to say, well, we think you're infringing or anything like that. So.
Maybe also trying for a triple damages case down the road, but probably
precisely.
They're just hoping you're going to write them a check or willing to
exactly.
license something. Whether or not it's without a patent issue, you don't even know what the claims will be.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you talk all about pricing strategy? Was it just based on margin you wanted off the BOM, or was there consumer behavior associated with the 179 and the 199?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of consumer behavior behind it. So we had our V1 product on the market, and it was priced at $295, and we saw at $295 customers who really, really needed the product were willing to pay for it. So we had a lot of small businesses, a lot of vacation renters, stuff like that, who really loved the idea, and they ate it up. But then there are a lot of customers who love the idea, but $295 was just a little bit too much to commit to. So I think in this range of products, $199 is a huge, huge mental price break, because it's the price of a new iPhone on contract. is $199. And so I think $199 or below is a great price to shoot for because it's accessible. The moment you go above that, whether there's a huge difference between $250 and $350, I don't think so. Now, $99 versus $199, that's a massive difference. Conversely, we did have to ground ourselves in fundamentals. So when we came back to the new version of the product, we said, we want to be able to manufacture this product with X margin at X quantity. We know we can't get that margin at 1,000 units, but we want to be able to hit that margin at 10,000 or 50,000 units. So we did have that in mind. And you want to be able to, you want to understand what your channel strategy is, even at that point, because if you're selling direct, you have much more margin to yourself, whereas if you're going through any of the channels, you essentially have to hand off 40 to 50% to other people. So you've got to price that in and then price your own margin below that. So,
One last question.
Yeah.
On the actual crowdfund time you did, was there a time stop of 30 days, and how did you determine that?
Yeah, 30 days was the time stop, and it just felt like a simple, natural number for us to do. I mean, there's a lot of campaigns out there that were, they were trying to go for 45 days instead of 30, but we said, let's just shut it off at a month, and it's clean, it's simple. Conversely, it's funny, we had a lot of people asking us about, why didn't you guys have different tiers or different options or different products? And we're like, well, we only had a week to build this platform in. But it made it very simple for the customer, is you buy this thing and that's all. We're not selling you t-shirts, we're not selling you posters, we're not selling you anything else, we're selling you this product. And it really focuses them in on, do I want to buy this product? So,
Thanks.
yeah. Cool. Well, unless anybody has any other questions, I'd be happy to talk a little bit more on our experiences with manufacturing and how that's been in China and Shenzhen. Stuff like that. So, yeah.
Kind of the concerns that you had before going to manufacturing, and then what you've heard from customers and how they were different.
Yeah. What we've heard from customers with regards to what?
Just what the product should do, how it should work.
I see. So I'll start with that question with regards to what the customer's feedback was, because anytime you put something new out there and it gets a little bit of traction, you'll hear a ton of feedback all at once. And you have to understand, is this feedback definitively going to be something that I really need to implement, or is it people sort of just throwing something into the ether and it's not really actually actionable? So a lot of the feedback we always receive is, this is a security product, I don't want this to be virtual. Or I don't want my keys to be in the cloud. And that's understandable, but there's nothing we can do that really solves that. That is fundamental to the product. So, okay, that's the first level, but what other things are our customers interested in? And we, at that point, we were really focused on Bluetooth Low Energy, but go back over a year ago, NFC was still really hot. Google definitely, Bluetooth Low Energy support wasn't even on the horizon. And there's a lot of people saying, well, gosh, why don't you make this NFC? I want this to really be NFC. And we looked into NFC a lot, and we actually ship with an NFC tag if a person wants to use it. It's sort of a passive way to use NFC. But we said, look, we see where things are going with this. There's no NFC support coming in the iPhone as far as anyone can see. Google's eventually going to have to kowtow and put in Bluetooth Low Energy. And the experience is just going to be much better, because the experience that we saw with the product, and again, coming back to the fundamentals of what we saw about the product, was with NFC, you have to take your phone out of your pocket, unlock your phone, and then tap it against the door in order to carry out a command, which is really no faster than tapping and loading an app and pressing a button. And we wanted it to be much more seamless than that. And in order to do that, we needed more range, and that's why we stuck with Bluetooth. So we took that feedback, but we didn't really change anything about the product. I think in terms of, say, like the software experience and so forth, we had a lot of people who were saying, we really want this to be integrated with X home automation system or Y home automation system. And while that didn't really change anything we were doing, it reinforced our belief in making the product open in terms of open APIs and letting people do whatever they want to from day one. And it reinforced that decision, but it didn't actually change any decision. coming into with regards to sort of manufacturing, and I talked a little bit about how we approach the domestic versus the overseas. And so the complexity of our product is why we eventually went overseas. On that end of things, it's always hard to take the leap and enter into a relationship with a CM because they are going to be your closest partner in all of this stuff. The CM, it can make or break stuff, and we've had a fair number of issues with our CM. They've been very responsive at dealing with them, but if you go to a CM who doesn't have core competency in what you're doing, so if you go to someone who hasn't done consumer electronics, then you're going to be the one who's bringing them up to speed on that, and you're going to be the one essentially sort of paying for their learning curve. So I would say very carefully identify your CM based on the profile of your product and how they fit together well. I know a lot of folks have been talking about going to toy manufacturers for small mechanical stuff because they're high precision, and because of all the flack from the U.S. market with regards to toys having poisonous compounds and stuff like that. They're very, very sort of clean factories, and they know what they're doing, and that's one of those things that I've heard for small mechanical products. If you are building a mechanical product and you go to someone who purely makes TVs and smartwatches and stuff, you're at a huge disadvantage because you have to have a gear train, you have to have things that are moving, you want to go find someone who's an expert in gears. So getting down to the core of what you're doing and figure out what that is and again, match your profile to that CM. As usual, everything always takes more time than you expect it to. What's going to happen is you'll get a certain amount of time on a tool and you'll see those number of days, but the rework of that tool may be the exact same length of time as it took to bring the tool up the first time as you bring in test shots and all that stuff. In worst case, if they really screw up the tool, they're going to have to go back and cut a new one. So I would say allocating a lot of time for tools to come online is definitely something that you need to do, especially the more parts that you have and the more interacting parts that you have. So given we have so many injection molded parts, debugging our tooling took a huge amount of time because there's, if you have flash on one part that's twisting or interacting with another part, it's sort of game over for us because we're fighting against friction in there. Things like that. Whereas, for instance, I know with the Pebble watch, with the first generation Pebble watch, their big thing was waterproofing it and getting the lens perfect so that you could see through the lens and making sure that it's clear and it doesn't have any obstructions. So they wanted to go to someone who could really get the lens right. We found a good CM to work with, but they are outside of Shanghai, not outside of Shenzhen. And the tricky thing with that is the CMs love to work with all the suppliers that they know, and the suppliers in our CM's network were all Shanghai-based or near Shanghai, Ningbo. But the challenge there was a lot of them hadn't done consumer electronics-y stuff, and so we did have to sort of ourselves go in and pick out certain suppliers for our CM, which typically your CM handles all of it for you, but you might have to be more proactive than you would expect there. And to sort of confirm that fact, my co-founder is actually in China right now dealing with ops. And at the end of last year, he spent a solid 2.5 months there dealing with ops stuff. So you may have to be very, very hands-on with this stuff and dealing with it. Yep.
At which point did you start the process of figuring out how to actually manufacture this? And what was the process like? Did you just go online and try to look for particular companies that did something similar, or did you find a contact point in the US that gave you access to a whole network of manufacturers? And then once you decided that, what was the process like? Sending an email, setting up meetings, and then just go there and meet them?
Yeah.
I'm curious, what was the timing of the process like?
So we started the process at the end of 2012, before our crowdfunding campaign, and we started getting the quotes together. And so typically what happens is you pull together a quote package of your BOM and essentially all of your parts at that point, even if it's not final product. In terms of who you get to quote out that package, we were working through our mechanical engineering firm at that point who helped us out, and they had a bunch of contacts in terms of manufacturing. But of course, the guys here are going to be the ones you want to ask about that. We also recently started working a bit with Dragon. That's all they do all day long is they have a list of suppliers that they go to and known suppliers, and they'll quote your stuff out. You usually want to run a competitive quote process, so you're going to expect, 3, 4, 5, 6 quotes and try to really put it out there and get as many CMs to quote it as possible. And then typically the step from there is essentially going in factory visits. After that is you want to get a feel for each factory and each flavor and the products they've done to really hone in on which factory you want to go with. And this is all, in terms of how you line this up relative to product development and crowdfunding. Taking crowdfunding out of the picture, you want to do this sooner rather than later because you might still have changes going on with your product, which you have to nail down a month or 2 months after you select your manufacturer, but having them lined up is really helpful. Typically, if you're doing this with a crowdfunding campaign, you won't want to get too far in this process until you have your crowdfunding campaign, because then you have demonstrable demand, which you can take to the factory, to the CM, and the CMs are always excited to see that. So, yeah.
One other question: what was the process that you guys followed working with? You mentioned a mechanical design company, and I'm guessing, I don't know if the industrial designer was either part of your team, part of that company, or an external source, and how do you manage that?
Yes. So the industrial designer was external to the mechanical design company. She had done work on sort of the Xbox and the Xbox Connect and stuff like that, and we knew her through our network, but she was essentially an independent contractor for us. And getting her to work with a mechanical firm at times was difficult because the mechanical firm wouldn't very clearly outline the certain characteristics that certain rules that she couldn't break. And so she would go ahead and put together a design, and it sort of became this iterative back and forth process where it's like, no, this design isn't quite big enough to encompass this, and back and forth, but then we eventually honed in on it. I think you really have to let the industrial designer drive and the industrial design drive your end goals, because it's sort of like looking at concept cars. Is you'll go see a concept car on the show floor, and then you'll see the car that arrives from it 3 or 4 years later, and they can be two very different animals, and you want to get as many of those fine touches and those things into the final production product as possible. Otherwise, the mechanical folks, they'll flatten out bevels, and they'll change edges and square off corners and things like that. So keep your ID person very tightly involved with that almost until the tooling starts to get made. And even then, you'll want them to sort of do a little verification to make sure that that's what you guys envisioned. And of course, you go through all the sample creation with SLAs and 3D printed models, and making sure that you get what you want in that stage. So, yeah. Cool.
One last question.
Yep.
About your site. You have certain feature sets advertised.
Yes.
On the site. How did you determine what feature sets you wanted to display and which you left out?
So we basically tried to hone in on which features play to the story of the product. So the product is designed around the story of how people use it. And so every aspect that we added to it, like the Bluetooth or the door knock sensor, things like that, play to the general story. And so our marketing is essentially just retelling that story. So our marketing is retelling everything we want the user to consider in terms of this product. With regards to sort of leaving things out or holding things back, we didn't really do much of that. I think that there are a couple features we could have done that with, but I'm glad we didn't. So for instance, like the door knock sensor could be like a kind of a cool one more thing addition, which we could have added on later on. But there really wasn't that much in our product that we wanted to do that with. I think I'm trying to think of other companies that have done this. A few others, I think, Pebble said the waterproofing thing and Bluetooth Low Energy. But at the end of the day, you're going to have some core functionality, cull away as many features as possible because you have a limited amount of development time and you need to get it out the door. And you might want to save it for getting customers excited during your project rather than during your campaign. So, cool. Well, thanks a lot, guys. Yeah, let me know if you have any other questions, and I'd be happy to help out. I'm just Cameron@lockitron.com, so drop me a line anytime with any questions you have.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thanks.